Okay, well, I'm Dennis McKenna, and what I do is harder to define, but I say I'm an ethnopharmacologist, which is somebody that studies the indigenous use of often plants, but not always that are medicines or other things, different cultures. And my focus, of course, has been on hallucinogens for 40 years, and primarily ayahuasca. I did my PhD on ayahuasca at the University of British Columbia and got my doctorate in 1984. Worked at NIH. I did a postdoc at NIH, and yeah, in the 90s, I helped organize the first biomedical investigation of ayahuasca in Brazil with one of the syncretic churches, the UDV. My first real job was with a company called Shaman Pharmaceuticals, which was ethnobotany-driven drug discovery. And I've just been fascinated with psychedelic plants and ethnomedicine for all that time. I worked in the corporate world and now kind of the academic world. Also, I'm affiliated with the Hefter Research Institute, which is similar to MAPS, but smaller, less well known, but also doing work mostly with psilocybin. I'm a founding member of that organization. So, in a nutshell, and
great. So tell me, based on your plethora of experience, both personally and professionally, so why do you think psychedelics, particularly very psychoactive plants such as ayahuasca, why do you think they're such a significant part of the human experience, in your opinion?
why are they a significant part of the human experience?
Or why could they be for people?
Well, I don't think they are necessarily universal. Not everyone is exposed to these things, but I think they're learning tools, basically. I think the indigenous people have the concept that ayahuasca and these other sacred plants, but if you want to think of them that way, but they have the idea that they're teachers. They talk about plantas que enseñan, plants that teach. I think that's very apt. I think that's exactly what they do. I think that they are cognitive learning tools. They enable a person to step out of their normal reference frame temporarily and look at things in a different way. And that could be very useful. So in that sense, I think they are teachers. And I think that, people find the experiences from psychedelics often extremely meaningful, at least personally meaningful, and sometimes life-changing and therapeutic in many ways. I think that's the basis, really, of the therapeutic effects of psychedelics. They let you look at your issue, mental health, depression, or whatever, from a different perspective. And in so doing, you can find ways to resolve blockages of various kinds. So I think psychedelics have numerous applications, but they're more than therapeutic, right? I mean, they have that, and that's important. They're also tools for understanding the mind and consciousness. I think that is important, and I also think that they're tools for understanding the world. In a sense, they're scientific instruments through which you can look at the world in a way that you've never looked at before. And if you happen to be a natural philosopher or someone studying nature, it can be as important as a telescope or a microscope. It's an instrument. So they have multiple applications.
Let's talk a little bit more about the concept of plants as teachers, because in my subjective experience, but I really believe that plants seem to have a distinct kind of intelligence and maybe even a purpose or something that makes them want to connect and communicate with the human species, if that makes sense. Do you believe in that plants have that kind of intelligence?
Yes, I do. They do. I think that plants do have intelligence. I think that that's how they, these molecules that they make, and they make a vast array of molecules. And, a famous botanist has said, and I have said, repeating him many times, plants substitute biosynthesis for behavior. They make all these secondary compounds because they don't react to their environment through behavior, through fight or flight or that sort of thing. Their response is through chemistry because they're stuck in one place. And they make a vast array of chemicals because they have figured out photosynthesis. And among those chemicals, some of them happen to be neurotransmitter-like. In fact, they are neurotransmitters, and so they fit into the same receptors that our brain neurotransmitters fit into. So, and even our brains, the neurotransmitters in our brains are an evolutionary reflection of plant chemical compounds. So I do think that plants have a certain intelligence. It's not like our intelligence, but they're very much involved in signal transduction processes, which is a fancy way of saying information exchange mediated chemically. So it's a little different. We're not doing signal transduction in that strict sense right now. We're just talking to each other. But if I were emitting chemicals that your brain was picking up, then that would be signal transduction in the way that biochemists talk about it. That's what plants do to each other, to other organisms on the ecosystem level. And I do think that ayahuasca, is one of these plant teachers. And I think that, part of the ayahuasca tourism phenomena, ayahuasca has become a global phenomenon in the last 20 or 25 years, wouldn't you say? And partly because I think it's an ambassador from the Gaian mind, if you want to put it that way. The community of species on the planet is trying to get us to wake up and realize the damage that we're doing. And many people who take ayahuasca come away with this sort of renewed understanding of their relationship with nature and sort of a commitment to helping to nurture nature. That's exactly the message that these plant teachers wish to convey. A few things. Number one, recognize that you're part of nature. You don't dominate it, you don't own it, it doesn't exist for you to exploit. You are not separate from nature. This goes against 2,000 years or more of, the Western prejudice, the Western notion that nature exists for us to exploit. No, we are controlled by nature, not the other way. So that's one important understanding. And the other one is, to have that realization that, we're not separate, that we're threatening nature, and we have to change our whole reference frame. We have to change our consciousness with respect to nature. I can sit here and talk about this all day, and you can say, yes, I get it, okay, all right, but walk out of the room and forget about it. But 1 or 2 ayahuasca sessions will bring that home to you. People not only have to realize it, they have to integrate that into their heart. They have to bring that into their heart. And then they have to broadcast that message to others. So I think that ayahuasca is trying to, catalyze consciousness change on a global scale as a mechanism to avert the disaster that we're facing. Before we can begin to address it, we have to wake up. The plant teachers are saying, wake up. Wake up. Realize and acknowledge what's happening, and then wise up. Apply that smart, overdeveloped brain to finding solutions for the problems that we face. So if that's not plant intelligence, I don't know what is. It is a plant intelligence. So in that sense, I think that, I do believe in plant intelligence. I mean, it's not a question of belief. The evidence is there. You know, so that's kind of a long answer to the short question.
No, it's great. That's incredible.
Okay.
So with that thought, you've experienced it, I've experienced it, a lot of people here obviously have experienced it and know it to be a very specific truth. But that concept really transcends the current Western paradigm of reality, I feel like. Like if you go to a lot of people just off the street and talk to them about the concept of plant intelligence and a plant having an agenda or communicating, to lots of people that would just be totally crazy still.
Yeah. It would be, but there is increasing, a few years ago the idea of plant intelligence would just be dismissed out of hand, but there are now actually scientific studies and some people, there is lots of evidence for plant intelligence. I mean, it's not the same as our intelligence, but being primates, being animals, and being particularly big-brained primates, we're hung up on brains. Brains are not so important for intelligence. You don't have to have brains. What you have to have is complex networks of connectivity, which is essentially what the brain is. But ecosystems are the same thing. The trees in an old-growth forest are all connected underground by complex networks called mycorrhizal, fungal, plant symbioses, so that they are communication systems for the entire forest. The entire forest in some way works like a brain because it has this neural network. We just don't see it that way because we're not used to thinking of neural networks of that size. A neural network has to be contained in a brain. Not the case, not true. And there's really interesting work going on about these forest ecosystem communication systems. And some threat comes to the forest at one edge. All the trees in the forest know immediately what's going on and start cranking out chemicals to meet the challenge. So that's where you see intelligence manifest. Neural networks are all over the place, and those are what you need, but they don't have to be linked to neural systems as we understand it. So the term neural is, a bit of a misnomer, but it's not that they're hyper-connected networks of signal transduction. So.
That's super interesting. I could talk to you about that all day.
Yeah.
This might be a little bit of a jump, but that realization, that kind of line of thinking, does that have any spiritual implication for you, or is it very much just a scientific process of understanding the way our world works? Or do you think that investigating more into that kind of plant intelligence and greater workings that we don't yet understand, do you think that plays into something bigger that we also don't understand yet?
Well, yes, I do. I don't think you can have these experiences with ayahuasca, or also even study these systems without having a spiritual aspect to it, because again, when you take ayahuasca in nature and you have this sort of mystical revelation about our relationship with nature and about nature, there's certain sort of responses that result from that. One of them is a biophilia, which is love for life. We have an inherent affection for living things, almost all living things, right? I mean, manifested most obviously in, a litter of puppies and that sort of thing. But not everything is fuzzy and cuddleable, but still we feel this affinity, even if, so there's that. And then there's a feeling that everything is intelligent, it's the term is animism, actually, and indigenous people generally have an animistic outlook on life. in their worldview, everything is intelligent. Plants, animals, people, rocks, weather, they're all a expression of an inherent intelligence built into nature. So you can call that animism. And then pantheism is the other umbrella term for the feeling that, yes, nature is divine. There is a divine. It's not separate from nature. It is nature. God is built into nature, if you want to put it that way. Some outside entity didn't come along and create the universe. The universe is it waking up to itself. God is inherent in the structure of the cosmos. So that's a spiritual outlook. And interestingly enough, it's the indigenous outlook, and it's the psychedelic worldview as well. And in indigenous cultures, they kind of operate under this understanding, this perception. This is not really a belief system for them. This is a result of empirical observation. This is not like what we believe. It's that this is what we experience. It's obvious. It's just, you understand what I'm saying? It's actually closer to an accurate scientific understanding now, which has taken a long time to evolve, because for a long time science has been trying to deny spirit, but now they're being forced to acknowledge that spirit exists, particularly with where psychedelics is concerned. They have to acknowledge that there is a spiritual aspect to healing. That's what these things are. They are medicines for the spirit, for the soul. Well, there has to be a spirit or a soul if you have medicines for them. And this is something that biomedicine pushes back against. They don't want to really go there, but they have to go there, and this is, the problem is that, among many problems with biomedicine, it is that it's been trying to sort of deny the spirit and exorcise, if you will, the spirit out of medicine for 150 years or so. Yes?
That note, so to sort of a little bit deeper into that, what role do you think psychedelics have or will influence what I think is the inevitable convergence of science and religion and other spiritual practice?
How will psychedelics influence
For me, I think it's sort of inevitable that the more science looks into how the universe works, we understand more about our reality. That's eventually going to converge with our ideas, most people's ideas of religion and spirituality. Do you think that psychedelics are an important part of that process?
Yeah, I think they're an important part of that. This is part of our spiritual evolution, if you will. But I think, again, this is one of the reasons that psychedelics are in some ways seen as a threat to religious institutions, because they put an individual in direct contact with something transcendent, something divine, if you will. Organized religions don't like that. The last thing they want you to do is have a mystical experience, because that's inherently out of their control. The whole idea is, we have the mystical experiences. We'll tell you what that means. You don't go there, You can undermine all that. You go around the middleman, the priest or whatever the hierarchy is. You can just directly have that experience. It's nature calling to us, sending the message, and we can respond. That's going to change spirituality, religious practices, and so on. But organized religions are not going to go down easily. They're going to push back, and they have pushed back. So it's because they recognize that this is a threat to. In our society, organized religions have become hollowed out shells of themselves, and for very few people do they deliver any kind of spiritual satisfaction. I suppose that for some it does, but many people do not find much. They feel that it's empty. There's no real meaning behind it. Is this all there is? And are we supposed to believe the stories that they tell us about the afterlife and all that without any evidence at all? So I think there's a real longing on the part of many people to have really personally meaningful spiritual experiences. Psychedelics provide that under the right circumstances. So because they're the real deal. I mean, but they're threatening because organized religions as they're practiced, they are really not spiritual institutions. They are sort of almost like quasi-military institute. I mean, their real goal is to control your behavior, not to put you in touch with the divine. People sense this and they want to move outside that framework, so they go to South America or wherever to seek a genuine experience. I think most of the people that come to these retreats are not looking for thrills. They're looking for some meaning, and our whole culture conspires to suck all meaning out of our life. It's so easy to waste all your time in meaningless distractions. People are not happy with, it doesn't produce satisfaction, so they go looking for something meaningful. And psychedelics can deliver that.
On that sort of note of people finding meaning through psychedelics, in the past, that process has sort of very much threatened existing power structures, like we sort of talked about the church, and now you see it politically, or in the past we've seen it politically. We see it a lot, or I sort of think in terms of, plant intelligence and motivation. There's also so many issues that tie into in terms of the environment and our cultural mentality, etc. What challenges do you think are we still currently facing? Do you think that those challenges that existed in the past are still there? Are we going to a new age of understanding? Do we have a lot further to go? Like, where do you think we're at?
I think we're at a very critical sort of juncture in the evolution of consciousness and the evolution of life, and in the current state of the planet, because we have put so much pressure on the equilibrium systems, the homeostatic systems that keep the planet in equilibrium and keep it survivable, because of our thoughtless pollution through carbon dioxide and these other things. We've now, these systems are incredibly resilient. But if you keep pushing and never let up, you can reach a tipping point where then they cannot recover. And I think the ecosystem as a whole, Gaia, if you like that concept, and I do, I think it's a very apt way to think of it, the planet's intelligence, the entire community of species is intelligent. They recognize that they're under threat. The cause of the threat is clearly these 7.5 billion monkeys that are crawling all over the place, laboring under delusions that nature has no value. And so this is the result of 2,000 years at least of brainwashing. The major Western religions tell you that you should not be concerned with the things of this world because your reward is in the next world. And the subtext of that is, do not value nature. In fact, so it devalues nature and everything to do with nature. It devalues the fact that we're bodies, we're biological systems. This is why, the three great taboos of the Western religions are what? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? The foundation of life is sex, drugs, and rock and roll as biological systems, right? Sex, that's pretty obvious. That's what propagates the species. Drugs, well, as I tell people, we're made of drugs. The reason we enjoy drugs is because we're made of drugs, and That's why these plant compounds work. We're biochemical systems of hormones, enzymes, receptors, all this stuff. We're basically meat engines that run on drugs. And so you can put other drugs from outside in and interesting things happen. Rock and roll, where does that fit in? Well, you know, so many of these more strict sort of fundamentalist religions forbid dancing, forbid any kind of thing. But in fact, we are a dance, right? Biology is based on oscillation. Living systems are oscillating systems. That's about rhythm, right? Metabolism is the oscillation of a biological system. And when metabolism is not there, when there's no oscillation, it's not a very interesting system because it's dead, right? I mean, we are, you know, we look at each other, we think of ourselves as things, but we're not. We're things, but we're processes. We're interesting because we're processes. And it's sort of like the difference between, you know, a piece of music that might be on a piece of paper, and when you actually play the music, you see what it is. We're sort of a musical symphony of our own. So those things are inherently built into biology. And the Western, you know, Abrahamic religions, in fact, brutally stamped out the earlier goddess-based, ecstasy-based, biology-based religions and replaced it with this sort of hollow shell that you have to deny everything about corporality. You have to deny everything about being in this world in the hopes that you will be saved, you will go to heaven. Well, this sounds like a con game to me, frankly. Where's the proof that there's any heaven to go to? I would rather focus on appreciating a life and appreciating being alive and being a biological system, because that's what we are. And there's wonderful things about having a body and being a biological system. If you know, we can enjoy life. This is what we are. We do not have to look to some salvation up ahead. So this is why psychedelics are, you know, a threat to these sort of hegemonic religions, always have been, and those religions have always brutally tried to suppress psychedelics. When, you know, the Spanish got to the New World, they found all of these indigenous religions using everything from, you know, ayahuasca to mushrooms, and they lost no time trying to stamp that out. You know, they were particularly pissed off when they found out that Teonanacatl, which is the Aztec name for the magic mushrooms, means flesh of the gods. Right, because no, we have the franchise on the flesh of the gods. Sorry, you know, but you people have to go because the Catholic, you know, communion is the flesh of the gods. It doesn't have much of a punch. You know, the Aztec flesh of the gods actually delivers, so they had to try to suppress the competition. And they sort of succeeded for a while, but look where we are now. So we're rediscovering these things, and I think it's good. I think it's good that we, you know, question. You know, there is so much about the values of Western civilization that are questionable to me, that seem to be in denial of life in a certain way. And you know, this has its origin of these religious institutions, but then that bleeds over into government and business and corporate practices and all this. You know, in the original sort of, you know, in the most, I guess, empathetic instantiation of Christianity, you know, they put Jesus forward as a compassionate, and do we need to be saved? But putting that aside for the moment, and I don't see a lot of evidence. I mean, Jesus was all about mercy and compassion and not being judgmental and helping those who need help and all that. I don't see that happening in the current political system, yet so many of these people are, they wrap themselves in the cloak of Christianity, and it's like, you call yourselves Christian, but you're happy to let people starve in the streets or go without medical treatment. So I don't see that those religions are really helping us become better people. Ayahuasca might help us become better people. It wants us to. I would love it if we did. So that's important. I think we're at a really important time of change where we have to get beyond this. I mean, we see now, particularly in the sort of latest instantiation of this, we could see where it's going. Well, now we're there. I mean, the Trump administration is the most sort of anti-life administration that has come along in a long time. And it seems very much about not cognizant of the harm that its policies can have on many, many people. So this is what happens when you carry that to an extreme. Now here we are. But we have psychedelics. And for our community of interest, they are the answer to all of this in a certain way. Or, I feel like politics is not effective anymore, but plant medicines can be effective because plant medicines can change hearts and minds. That's what has to happen. They do it one at a time, and they're effective. It's not, it's not like a political revolution. It's much quieter than that, but it does have an impact over time. Really the question is it happening fast enough? But I think anyone that has the mission, the passion to bring these plant medicines to other people, I think that's ultimately a good thing, because people benefit from these experiences and they become better people.
Do you have any thoughts as to how people should best have these experiences, particularly with ayahuasca? We see this huge influx of people traveling to experience it, more specifically, for example, in the Amazon with Shipibo tradition. Do you have any thoughts on how people should have these experiences?
How they should have the experiences? I don't say that there is only one right way to do it. You can go to the Amazon and you can have a traditional experience. You can have a neo-shamanic New Age type experience in Marin or wherever you can, or in Brooklyn. You can, you can join one of the churches that uses ayahuasca and have the experience that way. I think all of these are appropriate. I think that these are like vessels. These are vessels or contexts in which the thing can happen. Ayahuasca is like water. It's going to fill whatever vessel you want to put it in. If you want to present it in a church context, it works that way. If you want to present it in a maloca in the Amazon, it works that way. It works in all these ways. And the reason it works is that the context, what we call the setting sometimes, is not so important. It's important that it be conducive to thoughtful use, that it be safe, right? It's got to be safe. That's the primary thing. You're putting yourself in a position where you're vulnerable deliberately. So if you're with a person that has designs on you or bad intentions, then you're vulnerable. So you do have to choose the situation carefully, but then let it happen, because the real teacher is the medicine, not the shaman or the psychotherapist. It's this one-on-one interaction between you and the medicine, you, the teacher, and you. If you want to think of it as a teacher. And that can happen in any of these contexts, and that's the important thing. Psychedelics in general and ayahuasca is an intensely personal experience. And as long as you take it with good intentions or an open heart, I should say, thoughtfully. You don't even necessarily have to impose an intention on it. You can, but the intention should be learn what you can. You're in a learning situation. Let the teacher guide you. And trust, because it's not always easy, these lessons, but the hardest lessons are sometimes the most valuable. So you have to, it's that one-on-one interaction that goes on between the plant teacher and the person. That can happen in a lot of different contexts. But the important thing is that it does happen. It be allowed to happen.
And how do you think our world, our society would change if, say, miracle situation, overnight, everyone had ayahuasca, if it was a accepted thing and lots of, huge, more abundance of people tried it? What world would we wake up to? How would it be different?
I think if everyone had ayahuasca overnight, it would probably be a disaster.
Well, yeah. Probably not what I would recommend, but
I know what you mean. But I think actually it does have to happen slowly, and I think but maybe faster than it's happening because we don't have a lot of time left, and this is the only, I feel, the last best hope to avert these accelerating environmental disasters that are going to overtake us very soon. But I think I think we've been doing this for the last 40 years or so. You've got to develop institutions and practices and networks and organizations to integrate these things into our society. And we've been learning how to do that. When LSD came along in the 60s, we had it dropped like a bomb into American society, and we had no context for it. We didn't realize that there were traditions thousands of years old using these things. It was just came from nowhere, and it caused a great deal of social disruption, a great deal of hysteria and fear that led to all of these things being banned sort of in a blanket way, a knee-jerk reaction. And then it took years and years for the research to even begin to open up again. But over time, we have learned how to use these things. We now have people in our society, elders, whatever, and other types of people that know their way around these medicines, and they can teach younger people, and they can develop these institutions. And they are, in fact, developing. It's just that because these things are still illegal, a lot of them are underground, but they are there. And best thing that could happen is if they could just come out of the shadows and just operate openly. And I think what I would like to see is to have centers where you could go and take psychedelics, ayahuasca or mushrooms or whatever, under pretty safe conditions and a comfortable place, like a spa essentially, like a lot of the centers in Peru. There's no reason why we can't transplant that model to the States, and I think it's a good model. I think that you could take the whole family there for a weekend. I think that psychedelics can do a great deal for family dynamics, better communication, more compassionate relationships between men and women and children, and that whole domestic thing. And it's the dysfunctions in that institution that are responsible for so much of the psychic pain and mental illness in the world. I mean, somewhere in a person's personal history, if they have PTSD, if they have intractable depression, if they're addicted, all the things that the psychedelics are said to be used to treat, if you look back far enough, you find that something happened in childhood, that a critical event that rendered people, wounded. And then they go through life wounded, and they're not whole people, they're not happy, so then they wound the people around them, and it's this propagating context of, and there's no remedy for it. That's the thing. You go to the doctors and you get into the mental health structure that we have. If you're lucky, you get to see a psychiatrist, and if you're lucky, you get, you expect to leave with a prescription for some medicine like SSRIs or whatever that probably won't work very well. And so that's the whole biomedical context of the use of, it relies far too much on these psychopharmaceuticals, ignoring these things that can actually resolve the situation. 2 or 3 sessions with ayahuasca or psilocybin properly done can cure things like depression and PTSD and so on. You don't have to take medications the rest of your life. That essentially is a kind of a chemical engineering of your personality. These medicines let you rediscover your real personality, which society and your life experiences have taken away. So that's the real power of these things. And that's another reason that make them sort of dangerous to the established community. Just on the most basic level, there's no revenue model here. It's hard to make a buck out of this. Since medicine and pharma are basically about making money, it doesn't fit into their model. And so that's why there's pushback against it, and also a certain reluctance to allow it as well, because it's a threat to the way they do things now, which is a sign that we're probably on the right track, Yeah.
And my final question, so what message do you have for young people out there who are pushing these boundaries, who are working hard to change the cultural landscape that's preventing us from, or that has prevented us in the past from exploring plant medicine?
What methods? What do you say?
What message would you have for, what words of wisdom? You're looked up to by quite a lot of young people who are interested in this.
I guess maybe the primary message that I would have is think for yourself, learn to think for yourself, have faith in only one thing, yourself. Don't believe, if you have to buy into religion, you're always told you must have faith, right? Faith is essentially believing something without any evidence. It's like, okay, you have to accept these tenets of the faith, which often seem very unlikely and dubious, right? But if you're going to be a good Dogen, you have to accept them. Faith is an impediment to understanding. The beautiful thing about psychedelics is they do not require faith. They require only courage, right? They require the courage to drink the cup, smoke the pipe, do the thing, let the individual communication between plant teacher and person go on, and then you can make of it what you will. You can read and read about everybody else's interpretation of it, and that's great. It's good to learn about it. But nobody can tell you what it really means to you. That's the thing. It's one of those things that no one can do this for you. So my approach to these retreats, I do them too, and my approach is provide a safe environment, as much knowledge as people want, so that they feel confident going into it, and then let it happen and let them evaluate it for themselves. And if they need help with that, that's fine. That's part of the integration process. But somebody that comes along and says, I'm going to take you through this, and I'm going to show you this, and no, you're not going to show me a damn thing. I'm going to show myself that with the aid of the plant teacher. So, you don't have to believe anything anybody tells you about it. You're capable of forming your own opinions and interpretations. You don't even have to believe Dennis McKenna or Terence McKenna. All we are is people that had these experiences and came to our own conclusions about it. So that's the thing. Have faith in yourself and think for yourself. That's the main thing. So that's it.